It is my distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Mr. Darren Law of Flying Lizards Motorsports, probably the most heralded DE graduate of our program. Okay, that's not true, but Darren has an esteemed career stemming from the early 90s as a professional race car driver. In 2014, he had the honor of taking over ownership and management of Flying Lizard Motorsports. This diverse background, it gives him a very unique perspective on not only motorsports, but also high-end sports car development. So he's going to bring us some stories and some photos of his very colorful history, and some insight, too, that keeps in line with our theme of looking forward, going forward. Please welcome Mr. Darren Law.
Thank you, Steve. All right, hi folks. First of all, Lone Star Region, thank you for inviting me out to speak and talk about myself. Gotta love that. So before this whole thing got going for me, I'd spoken to Doug, and he said the theme this evening or going forward here is looking forward, going forward. So that really struck a chord with me because my background, which I'll go into, really that's a big part of it. I drove professionally for many years, and as a driver, which I hope to give some insight and some history about professional driving and what it takes to get there and do it and be involved with the factories and all that, you're always looking forward, going forward, trying to keep the deals going and that type of thing. So anyway, this evening I'd like to just share some of my history and, like I said, some insights about driving. And it's not only from the driver's side, it's from the manufacturer side, it's from the team side, because I've kind of run the gamut here of late. So a little bit about my history, and I won't spend a ton of time on it. I've been involved in motorsports my entire life. My father actually worked for Roger Penske and crewed for Mark Donohue back in the late 60s. So for those of you that follow racing and know some of its history, you'll know who those are. I found it really interesting this evening, before we came in, when we had the talk out front, or that kind of happy hour time, there were many people that follow racing and knew of Flying Lizard, the Porsche team that I spent so many years driving for. And then there were several people that were like, what's that? You know, it was like, it was a really diverse group. So hopefully this will round it out for everybody and give you some insight. So for me, I grew up racing go-karts. It was in my family for years, and I started off when I was 11 years old, and that's really a good starting point for most young drivers, and most professional drivers, Formula One or whatever, started off in karts. I did very well. I won championships in karts. I got my real first opportunity in cars in the mid-90s. I ran in a series that ran with IndyCar. It was called North American Super Touring Cars. These cars were, if you follow it in Europe, British touring cars, little 2-liter cars. They came to the States for a couple years, so it kind of gave me an opportunity. I had a gentleman that helped me, and for most drivers, unless you have massive financial support behind you, you need someone to help you along. And I actually had a guy, he was a doctor out of Kansas, that helped me kind of get my program going, which was really good. From that point on, really my first Porsche, which is a lot of my racing history, was back in '98. I drove the 12 Hours of Sebring, and I kind of came through the ranks. You know, again, in racing, as a driver, you've got to have a lot of financial backing, or you gotta work it, and you gotta do well, and you gotta promote yourself. It's a long, hard road to get there, and it's actually harder today, I think, even than it was back then. So I started racing Porsches back in the late 90s and progressed from there. I spent from the 90s all the way through to about 2014 racing professionally, driving professionally. It was such an unbelievable experience and a great life experience. I spent a lot of time in GT cars, from the early 993 air-cooled cars right into the water-cooled 996s to 997s to 991s as far as GT cars, and then I also spent a lot of time driving prototypes as well. The teams that I drove for, if you are familiar, Flying Lizard obviously is one of them. I spent from 2004 to about 2012 racing for Flying Lizard in GT cars, in the 911 GT3 RSRs. I also spent about that same amount of time driving for a team called Brumos Porsche, For those that have heard of Brumos, you'll know who they are. Very famous team from early on in the days of Hurley Haywood and Peter Gregg and Le Mans wins. Brumos was involved in prototype racing, which was the Grand Am series. So I spent a lot of time in prototypes as well. So it's been a really interesting ride for me. I won GT championships in the Porsches. In 2009, again, I don't know how many people follow all of the Daytona races and all that, but I won the Daytona 24-hour overall in a Brumos Porsche prototype, which was really the highlight of my career. It was an amazing thing. You know, there are many people that try to win Daytona and never get there. I literally spent 10 years before I actually got the win, but it was really special for me. We beat out the Chip Ganassi team, which was Juan Pablo Montoya and Dixon and Pruitt, and we did it with all these cars, all these prototypes had big V8s. We did it with our little flat six 4-liter and smoked them all. So it was cool, really cool experience. You know, as far as, again, racing, I spent many times, I've been to Le Mans, which is an unbelievable experience, which I'll go into. I spoke to several people, Hector and Steve. We talked about Le Mans and going over there. I don't know how many people follow Le Mans. It's an unbelievable experience, from the driver's side for sure, but even as a fan, there's nothing like it in the world. And even when I talk about it, I get chills. It's unreal. And I'll show you some really cool pictures from that time. So anyway, I have lots of racing stories that I can go on and on about. None of them, fortunately, are of me upside down on fire or in the air or anything like that. So I'm happy to say that. So in my years as a driver for Flying Lizard, this was, and again, I don't know how many people followed that era in the 2000s, this was the factory-supported Porsche program, Porsche GT program in the United States. And unbelievable experience. For me, I was not a factory driver, but I was involved with the team and hired by the team. So I spent a lot of time with probably a lot of the drivers that you guys may follow from Porsche, from Timo Bernard to Jörg Bergmeister to Mark Lieb to all of these guys. Spent a lot of time with them. Patrick Long. They were all my teammates at one point or another. So it's really interesting to see how the factory program works and what we got. And I'll kind of explain that as we go through. You know, one thing that I always look back on here is I spent, if you can imagine this, 15 years driving. I was hired to drive. That's all I did. I mean, that was so cool. And now, moving forward, looking forward, going forward, I've moved into the position of team ownership and team management. And now I realize how good I really had it. I'm telling you, this is a lot of work with employees and running a team and people. Oh, it was really good, just basically being a driver. So very cool experience. So a little history on Flying Lizard before I get into it. Flying Lizard was started in '04 by a gentleman named Seth Nyman, a very wealthy businessman, and his goal was to go out and compete and fight the factories and start an independent team and get to the factory status, which we did. We won 3 team championships, 3 drivers' championships. We won the 12 Hours of Sebring. We won the Petit Le Mans. We were on the podium at Le Mans in Europe. So just amazing accomplishment and kind of this looking forward, going forward theme. The whole program has evolved. It's not what it used to be. It's all about customer racing. So again, hopefully I can give you guys some insight into this.